Welcome to the Lean Solutions Podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders by helping you improve performance using process improvement solutions with bottom line results. My name is Patrick Adams, and this season I'll be joined by three other amazing hosts, including Catherine McDonald from Ireland, Andy Ulrich from Australia, and Shayne Daughenbaugh from the United States. Join us as we bring you guests and experiences of lean practitioners from all over the world.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast, led by your hosts, Catherine, the wonderful Catherine, and Shane. We are super happy to have you here joining us today. I'm very excited for the guest that's going to be on. I totally appreciate and revere this person simply because of his name as a great start. So, but before we get started, Catherine, to introduce the topic of this, I'm curious if you've had a time where you started to, you tried something new, rolling out some kind of new project at your house or at your work or business or whatnot, that, man, you wish either you had someone there beside you who is able to give you the do's and the don'ts, or you wish you would have had. Have you had that experience?
So many times, Shane, so many times. And look, to be honest, I don't regret it. I was just saying beforehand, you know, when you go to college, you study to be your black belt. I studied leadership coaching, but nothing can prepare you for when you go in and start working with teams and organizations. It's a whole different ball game. And no matter how many tools and techniques and the knowledge that you have, it's impossible, I think, starting off to get that right, to get it in the right order, to do the most with the tools, to lead people effectively. So you just have to go out, you just have to do your best. Obviously, there's times where I didn't do my best, it didn't go so well, but you know, I'm the type of person to go, look, let's just keep going, let's improve it, let's just keep going. And that's what I've done, because I do feel that I probably wouldn't, I guess, be as interested today or know what I know today if I didn't make the mistakes I did back then as well. So I think it's absolutely okay to try it out, see how it goes. But the most important thing is to reflect on what you're doing and to improve it, because that's what we teach, but we have to be able to do it for ourselves as well.
Right. Now there's also, with that, like when I started my business, I had the benefit of having people beside me who told me, hey, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do that. And while that was just a portion of what I experienced, just having someone there. And so that's why we're super jazzed to have Shane Wentz here. Shane, thanks so much for joining us. Catherine, tell us a little bit about Shane and so that we can jump into this.
Yeah, so Dr. Shane Wentz, nationally recognized for his leadership, continuous improvement, and innovation, has saved organizations hundreds of millions of dollars. His Army career began as an intelligence analyst and culminated in managing global human capital programs, earning top accolades, including induction into the Audie Murphy Club and the Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt certification. Post-Army, he led improvement teams at Siemens, Nike, and Radial, and now he's a lead consultant for a change in Latitude Consulting.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you. How are you today, Shane?
I'm doing great. We just got some rain that passed through down here in southern Florida, but it's cooled it off a little bit, so doing really well.
Super.
Excellent.
Super.
Shane, how long have you been with your current company? How long have you been there?
I've actually been doing consulting the last about 5 years.
Okay.
Loving it.
So my question here as we get started here, what do you see in talking about organizations that are looking to roll out lean, looking to implement something significant, not just a little smattering here or there, let's just clean some stuff up, but something significant. What do you see as some important first steps for an organization in rolling out lean?
Yeah, I think, one is you have to have a plan. I think every organization that I've had the privilege of working with, they want to do it right. I mean, there's no one that goes out there and says, hey, I want to mess this up, right? That's just not who we are as humans. So they want to do it right. I think the biggest mistake I see is that most of them have a plan. But I would say that plan misses some of the key steps, or the plan is not flexible enough to adjust if something happens, which normally does.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what in regard to this idea of the plan, What are some core components, 3 or 4, just as our listeners, maybe someone is a CEO of a company or an organization that wants to do something like this, heard about lean, interested. What are some of the core components that should be part of that plan?
Yeah, I like to break it high level into really 3 components. I say there's an evaluate or assess, there's a execute, and then there's a sustain, right? Those are kind of the high level 3 buckets. Underneath that first bucket of assess or evaluate, the first thing I encourage leaders to do is really to identify the why behind it. Why are they doing this, right? If you're doing this because you're looking at growing considerably, however you believe that you need to do some foundational things before that growth can occur, that's very different than an organization that maybe is I call it bleeding money and needs to do this to right the ship. Right. So there's a way different storyline behind that. So I think establishing that why, and then the second part of this, which I see a lot of organizations miss, share that why, communicate across the organization why you're doing this. Because what you really want is, yes, there is a top-down component of leadership saying this is what we're going to do, but you have to get the interest from the employees. And in my opinion, the first way you start to get the interest is telling the story of why we're going on this journey and why it's so important to the organization. So I think that's the critical part of the critical part of that kind of that first bucket of evaluate or assess. Once you get into the execute, then it's about prioritization, right? So making sure they prioritize the efforts. Once again, what we're trying to adjust for is the mistake I see a lot of organizations make, which, hey, let's go out and just fix everything, right? And if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So then it falls flat. And then I think in the sustainment, it's about celebrating the success, and it's about creating a pull for continuous improvement or for lean, right? If you do those first 2 components correctly, you should start to create a pull. So even though the leadership is saying we're going to do this, you start to have other leaders in the organization say, hey, we want to be a part of this. And that's where the real energy behind it comes.
So what happens with a company that, maybe leadership heard about this, read about it, came across something, super excited about it, or I don't know, whatever it is, but they started down this path, but maybe they've skipped some of this. Is it possible to fix this before you nosedive or crash into the side of the mountain, or stakeholders just like fire you and move on?
It is. And I think that's where it's incumbent upon whether you leverage an external consultant like me or whether you leverage an internal team or consultant, they need to be flexible. I mean, the change curve right now is real. The one thing I tell people that is a little bit sobering, but the one thing you can be confident of is right now in your adult life is the least amount of change you will experience for the rest of your life. Right? Said another way, if you think it's changing a lot now, buckle up, because it's getting ready to just go more and more, right?
I don't know if I like this information right now, Shane. You might want to just tone it down a bit.
So I think if you understand that, you have to understand that even though you might have a plan, I think it was Mike Tyson that said, hey, you walk into a ring with a plan, and that's great till you get punched in the face. And then the reality of it comes to light, right? And in my military service, when you're deployed, you go through and do all this practice for when you're going to go out and go out on this maneuver. And, the reason you spend so much time practicing is because you know that something is going to happen that's going to change the environment. And you have to anticipate that. So you can't just have a plan A. Oh, no, what happened? How are we going to adjust? No, you have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and then you make those adjustments. It's the same thing here. You have a plan, right? Let's be clear. You need to have a plan. But then if you get a certain part of the way, and let's say the why was not established and it wasn't communicated, that doesn't mean that we're going to stop and not go forward. It means we're going to have to pick that up somewhere along the way.
Right. Okay.
That's the real value in doing your homework beforehand, doing your preparation, having your scope, having it all clear, the expectations set, the plan agreed. Like, it's just so important, because then if something does go wrong, we can just go back to and look at what we set out in the first place and say, where do we go wrong? Why do we go wrong? And you can understand it as well. So it's easier once you have all that, I think, done and prepared and discussed in the beginning. And one thing I'm wondering, Shane, so you've talked a lot about so the steps, so creating the vision, engaging people in that, you know, doing your assessment, the implementation piece, the sustain piece. I'm interested to know, at what point do you think is training important? So a lot of what you talked about is, I guess, organizations are dependent on the consultant to do, but we don't want people to be too dependent on, let's say, the external person either. Sure, we don't. We want to maybe get the organization up and skilled to be able to do some of this work. So where does training fit in, do you think?
Yeah, I think training is one of the most misunderstood and misused steps, right, within the framework that I'm talking about.
Misused.
Yeah, so here's what I often see, and I've seen this both in corporate internal roles and as a consultant. We are going to train everybody at a certain level. We are going to train 10% at this level, 20% at this level, and we're going to closely track our numbers, and success is going to be measured by the number of people trained, and it's all well-intentioned, and it fails. And the reason it fails because training in itself can't be a measure of success, right? Training is a small piece of what we're trying to do here. So to me, initially, there's some training that has to be done with the leadership. The leaders need to know what is expected of them if they're going to lead a lean organization. What are the types of things they need to say? What are the types of things they need to do? Not say, not do. Then that starts to filter down. I like to start with one site, one department, one division, and start there, right? Because I think a lot of organizations want to do a complete rollout across the entire organization. Once again, it's well-intended. It's most likely not going to work, right? You need to start in one area, right? Because what we want to do is we want to create that pull. We want to create that excitement. We're also going to make some mistakes. And I'd rather make those mistakes early in that one area, learn from it, then we can adjust as we roll it out to other departments. So I want to do some training so that the leaders of the organization understand what we're doing and why and how to lead in a lean organization. I want that department we're going to start working with to have some training. Then what we want to do is as we start to roll this out, we'll start doing other pockets of training. But I like to save most of the training for what we call in the line of the work, right? So, you know, we're getting ready to do Kaizen. Let's do training around what Kaizen is and how to implement it. Then what you start to get out of that is you start to get a clear vision of who those, I call them the change champions, right? Who are those people that are comfortable with being uncomfortable and want to raise their hand and volunteer to help us move this forward? Because those are the people we want to identify for, whether we call it lean master, what we call it green belt, black belt, whatever it is. Those are the folks I want to start spending some time with, because me off-ramping as a consultant, which, let's be clear, early on, I have a date that I'm identifying with the leadership that I want to off-ramp, right? Those people are going to be the key to me being able to do that successfully, because they're the ones that are going to step in and start helping to facilitate and lead what we've been doing.
Right. Yeah, I can appreciate that, because what I heard in there that you said, but it maybe not have come for listening audience explicit, is there's a balance between training and implementing. Like, it's not just let's just keep training them all the way up to, you know, a master black belt before we start implementing some of these things. When you're training leadership, you're training them a chunk, and then they need to be able to practice it, and they need to be able to go into what you've trained them and put that in action, or else it's a waste of time and money. From what I have seen in my experience. But I'm curious, you know, if you're an organization thinking about this and buying into what you're talking about, where you narrow it down to, you know, a smaller, more manageable area, what are some key areas or maybe processes that you have seen that give you the most traction? Are there any, or does it even matter? Can you just start anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I look for is I look more for the people, the processes, and the leaders. One of the things I like to look for early on is who are those, you know, Simon Sinek describes them as innovators and early adopters, right? So
Yep.
Who are those innovators and early adopters that are just going to latch onto this and be like, yeah, let's go, right? If we've got a few of those in an area more than others, that's probably going to be a starting point for me. Now, the other thing I do look for, if you have organizations where you have a choice between, let's say, a transactional function versus one that is, let's say, manufacturing, distribution, or it is a little clearer to see.
Right.
I like to go away from transactional initially, because at least in my experience, it's easier and it's quicker to see the changes in the non-transactional functions.
Interesting. Okay.
That's just me. If you have a choice, right? Now,
Right.
you may not have a choice. If we're talking about healthcare or we're talking about something, you may not have that choice. But if you have a choice between the two, I find especially some of those people that are new to lean, transactional can be challenging because the processes aren't as visible. And we say things like go to Gemba, and they're like, well, Shane, where do I go?
Right. And I appreciate something that is embedded in what you said at the beginning, in starting with those early adopters. That in fact, you and I kind of had a little bit of a LinkedIn conversation this morning about it's not just about, you don't go first to a process, go to the people. Lean isn't about, or I should say, let's put this in the positive. Lean is about the people, taking the people with you and them making the changes. It's just giving them a different framework to think about. And I really love how you just mentioned that. Hey, your first response was look for those those innovators, look for those people that are eager to make a difference, because that's where the change happens, not in the process. I mean, it does, but the process isn't going to change itself. It's the people. So I really appreciate where you came from there, and just has that respect for people embedded in it.
And I think, Shane, just something to add on to that. I think, and I intertwine a lot of continuous improvement with leadership. One, because I'm very passionate about both. Two, I have a background in both. But I think the third reason is you can't separate the two, right? I mean,
right.
Lean is about change and it's about influence, and leadership is about influence. So, for me, what I try to go in is, a lot of organizations will say, hey, Shane, we want to do a green belt course or a lean master course. And here's our 10 high pos, right? Our high potential folks, right? And those are the people we want to go through. And I always say, hey, do you mind if I spend some time talking to them? Let's call it a screening process. Let's talk an interview process, whatever it is. Because normally I can spend a few minutes with someone and I know if they're going to be one of those folks that are going to be what we talked about, and are those innovators or early adopters. I mean, let's be clear. You can have high potential folks that are your laggers. They don't like change, but they're really technically proficient at what they do. And I would argue that I will take an innovator or an early adopter that is okay at their job over somebody that is highly skilled at their job, but is more of that lagger and that resistor to change. And there's a difference between the two.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And I fully agree. I mean, I always say as well, you absolutely cannot separate lean and leadership. It's just part of lean is leadership, and that's just it. One of the things I find, Shane, I don't know if you find as well, you've kind of touched on it there, but when I go in, some companies think they want lean, right? Roll out lean, and they think they're ready for that. But sometimes when you go in, they're not ready for it. And there's a piece of work to be done there, whether it's around leadership or culture, but there's just a piece of work, or management systems, whatever it is, there's a piece of work that needs to be done first. Do you ever come across that? And what's your response when you do?
Yeah, Catherine, one of the, under that first one, evaluate or assess, one of the things I really like to do, and let's be clear, there's some organizations that don't like to do this, and it doesn't mean I won't work with them. I'll highly encourage them to do this. But is an assessment. And it really is nothing more than spending a few hours with probably 10, 15 different employees. I ask them a series of questions. It's about 25, 30 questions. And I do it with different levels of employees. So I'll ask the questions of a few of your hourly associates, a few of your supervisors, a few of your mid-level managers, and a few of your executive leaders. Same questions. And then what I do is I will ask questions. I'll kind of write down the responses, and then me and one of my partners will sit down together and we'll score from 0 to 5 on a maturity scale. And normally we're looking for things like we're looking for those cultural enablers that experience and research has shown are more likely to lead to a successful lean implementation. And depending on where that score is, I have come back to organizations and I have told leaders, I don't think you're ready. And here's why.
Yeah.
Now, they can obviously say, hey, thank you. I understand we want to do this anyway. That's great. I won't say no, but I will make sure they understand that, hey, it is going to take a little more effort and we're probably going to adjust our plan a little bit. And it might take a little more time. But I want them to know that going in.
Yeah, I think those having a maturity, I suppose, model or matrix, I find that so helpful. Even just a visual to show an organization and to break it down and say, here's the different levels. And it's become so obvious where they're at on that, you know, maturity matrix then. And it's very hard to argue with that as well. So I think that's a really good technique and a good point to make, that it's important that the organization understands if they're ready or not. But as the consultant or external person coming in, it's up to us to make that clear as well and do that assessment. So yeah, well done. I really like that. That's good. That's really good. So
yeah, and hey, Catherine, if I could just add to that, because I think where there's this overlap with leadership and kind of, you know, these two things we're talking about, because I recently had a client that I did this. And one of the questions is around leaders. And, you know, some people, you know, get a little, you know, they don't like the question, but I think it's important. And what I'll ask is, do you routinely see your leaders at the place of work curious or asking questions about how things are going?
That's a great question.
And if the answer is on the lower scale, let's say 0 or 1 out of 5, that tells me that I'm going to have a little more work, maybe a lot more work,
yeah.
with some of the leaders, because, you know, as we know, one of the concepts is go to Gemba and actually be present out where the work is. And if that's not something currently being done, it's going to take some training and coaching to get them there versus a score of 3 or 4 where that's already routinely done. So there's going to be a little less resistance to that when we start rolling this out.
Hey everyone, I am sorry to interrupt this episode of the Lean Solutions podcast, but I wanted to take a moment to introduce you to our company, Lean Solutions. We exist to empower and equip people for positive change. We do this through our 3 pillars, which include training and development, coaching and consulting, and talent solutions. Whether you have specific areas for improvement or you're not really sure where to start, we can build tailored solutions and provide resources to meet your needs. Send us an email at office@findleansolutions.com to begin your journey towards transformation. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, and it's not a case of no, you're not ready to be lean. It's a case of you're ready, you're just at this level, and this is the work that needs to be done before we do all the stuff you might hear about in terms of lean. You know, that's sort of the way the discussion goes, but it's an important one, I think. So yeah, well done. Good, good. So we talked a little bit about mistakes, Shane, and the mistakes people make, and I know you've touched on a few, but there is an awful lot of literature and talk about what goes wrong with lean. And I know we did an episode on it as well, Shane, in terms of what can go wrong. But what do you see these days as the reasons for why there's still so much talk about why lean fails or can go wrong, when I actually think the knowledge out there in terms of what lean is, how it's based on respect for people, and it's to do with leadership, that seems to be increasing, but we still hear this. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so I want to go back to something I said earlier, because I think it's really important for people to understand. Leaders do not try to roll out they don't do a lean rollout in the hopes that it'll fail. I think I hear a lot of different terms thrown out and a lot of negativity around, well, you know, they just do it wrong and they don't get it. And, you know, I think we need to all understand that, you know, human behaviors models tell us that people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to do a crappy job at work today. It's just not how things go, right? Now, you take every group of employees or sports teams, and you're going to have a percentage of them, a small percent, that are elite performers. You're going to have a percentage of them, a small percent, that are underperformers. And they're going to have the rest that do what they're supposed to do every day. And I think that's where it comes in. And you have to understand that lean is about leadership. So first and foremost, you have to have leadership engagement. And I think there's a misperception about, well, you have to have leadership support. No. Support is very different than engagement, right? You can't just have a leader that says, yes, I will allow this. No. You have to have a leader that walks it, that talks it, that understands it, that has set the expectation that this is what we're going to do. So the number one mistake I see is that's missing. Now, I think if you understand that, you have to understand that's where, as a consultant or as an internal lean practitioner, it's your role to help coach those leaders on what right looks like. That they don't just get it. They don't, very, very, very few of them just naturally get it. Right. And I think we're in the state right now where I see a lot of executive bashing. Being an executive, being a CEO, a CFO is extremely difficult, right? I mean, they're uber focused throughout the day, and people say, well, I talked to our CEO and they, have a short attention span. Well, the reason is they're constantly thinking about three things. They're thinking about dollars and cents, right? Cost, revenue, which they better, right? Because if they don't, then we're not going to have jobs. They think, number two, they think about risk and risk mitigation, right? To the organization of the people. And number three, they're thinking about market share. If it's a publicly traded company, stock price. If it's private, the share of the market. So they're constantly thinking about those. So we have to use terms that they understand. And we use terms like, well, we're going to build a culture of lean. To an executive, that sounds like a warm, fuzzy, it sounds great. What does that mean in terms of those three things I just mentioned? And that's the way that we have to put it. And let's be clear, if we do this right, it's going to affect all three of those. It's going to affect dollars and cents, market share, and it's going to reduce risk to the organization. So leadership engagement is first and foremost, but I think we have to understand that it's our role, whether you're an internal or external consultant, to help coach them on what that looks like.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that role as an external consultant, in the role in that rollout? Like what really is their role? Can you give some high level points to that as yeah.
And I'll be honest, Shane, I learned this over a period of time. There was a point in my career as a consultant, especially, and I mean, it's fairly recent. I mean, I just got into consulting about 5 years ago. And I think it was a couple years in where I had a realization. I was talking with a client, and I was talking to their CEO, and they said, "Hey, Shane, I'm going to say something that I hope you'll take as a compliment because it's meant that way." And I was like, "Oh, here we go." And they said, I didn't quite understand what I was signing up for when I brought you in. I'm like, "Oh, here we go."
Oh.
And then he kind of did the shift, and he goes, "I wasn't bringing in just a lean consultant. I was bringing in a leadership consultant." And he goes, the value that you've brought is not just the lean, but he goes, "You're coaching me and you're coaching my team on what it means to be in an organization that's lean." And he goes, "I'll be honest." He goes, I haven't met a lot of people willing to do that." And he goes, "Most people don't want to coach executives." And he goes, "We've had some very tough conversations." And I don't call them tough conversations. I call them necessary conversations. There's a difference. But I find that there's too many, and I understand it, right? As a consultant, I mean, you can be fired at any time. But I think if we're going to do our job and we're going to do it right, and we're going to keep to the history of the people that came before us with Deming and Ono and people like that. I mean, they were called names other than brilliant and revolutionary during their times. Let's be clear.
Handsomely rugged.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think we have to be willing to have those tough conversations and to coach those people that maybe aren't accustomed to being coached.
Yeah, I mean, they don't bring people, consultants in to tell them what they already know. I mean, they might think they want that, but they don't. It's the opposite. You know, why would you hire somebody to tell you what you already know? So you have to be able to say the hard stuff, to be able to say what, I suppose, influence them to understand what they don't know. So yeah, I totally get that, Shane. Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, yeah, really important. Okay, so
Catherine, I'm just curious from your perspective. You know, it is a little bit different of a perspective from a whole different country and the cultural nuances there, but also from a female leadership perspective. What do you see, and how do you see, as Shane just described it? Hey, you're not just coming in, you know, to for this methodology for the people, the process, you know, the lean thing, but also, you know, supporting the leadership and helping grow the leadership.
yeah.
How has that been for you?
Oh, it's kind of why I made the point earlier about sometimes organizations contact me to support them on their lean journey or support them get started on their lean journey, but we don't actually start with lean. It's often we start with leadership coaching. It's where we help leaders to understand themselves better. So I do emotional intelligence coaching and I blend that at the start. I just think leaders need to lead themselves, is what I always say, before you lead other people. And oftentimes there's a piece of work there that has to be done, usually at the same time as we're rolling out lean and we're starting small. Like you said earlier, Shane, starting small within a small department or a small process. So start small, but also I think working on the leadership side, very rare, very, if ever, I've gone into an organization in Ireland and just rolled out lean using lean language. It's not like that. It's not like what you read or see. There's so much more to understand about the people development side first in every organization I've ever walked into. I suppose that's why I do the leadership coaching as well. I actually went and did that after I studied in lean, because I thought I would have everything I needed when I had lean, but I didn't. I needed the coaching side as well. So yeah, it's the same over here as I think as it is anywhere else. That's people first.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is and this is good for me because I'm relatively new to my own business. You know, Shane, you said 5 years, brother. I'm 5 months. So but what you're describing is very interesting to me, because what the implications of that is a longer term relationship. You know, if I'm going to be working with leadership as well as, you know, the people that are doing the work and implementing this, then I don't know, unless you find a way to kind of like the Matrix, you just plug in and download all that information into them.
Yeah.
But relationships take a while. Has that been your experience? And I don't know. I don't want to. And maybe this is not the right question to ask. So if so, please correct it, Shane. But typically, how long does an interaction go? Is there a standard for it? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? You know, or even longer to give them something of value and step away and go, you know what? I believe in what they have. It may not be perfect, but they're moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question, Shane. And I think once again, and I'll tie back to the leadership part, right? Because leadership, the definition I use for leadership is the ability to influence others to accomplish things by providing purpose, direction, and motivation. And the key term there is influence, right? Leadership starts, I think John Maxwell says, leadership starts and ends with influence. You can't influence people without, Catherine, what you brought up, which is trust, right? I mean, what we're doing in a lean rollout, let's be clear, is we're taking people where they're going to be uncomfortable, right? Anytime there's change, there's discomfort. And that's part of a lot of discussions I have, right? I mean, if I train for marathons, and there's nothing about getting ready to run 26.2 miles that is comfortable for me. I mean, I've done it 8 times. There is not. Right? So let's be clear about what we're doing here. This is not going to be about being comfortable. It's going to be about helping you be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so what I tell them is, first and foremost, I need to build those relationships with the key leaders. That is going to take, it's going to take me being there on the ground for a period of time, right? There's some of this that we can do remote, but there's some of this you just have to be together. I think it's critical that you break bread and have meals and get to know people and get to know families and what motivates them, and let them in and know about me and what makes me who I am, right? And, for the first 30 days or so, it's really about starting to build those relationships and the trust, because I'm getting ready to push them out of their comfort zone. So I have to have that trust built, right? So that's where it begins. So for me, my normal cycle is about 6 months, right? Now, there's a lot of it depends, right? There's some organizations where just based on my background, I can walk in and I can speak the language and I build rapport with them very quickly, and we might be able to go a little quicker. There's others where we might as well be speaking totally different languages. and it's going to take a little while. But I give them that up front, and I say, I'm going to start with a 6 month time frame. It may be a little shorter, it may be a little longer. Now, there's an engagement right now I've been doing for about a year. But the reason it's been that long is as we started rolling this out, they said, hey, Shane, would you mind helping me with some leadership training and coaching of some of my supervisors? So that's been about a 3 to 4 month time period, right? So kind of like you said, Catherine, it's, I kind of started on the lean side and then, found I also have a passion for leadership, and I've done it for quite a while. So I started doing more leadership training and coaching. And to me, when you find people that can do both of those, that is a difference maker, right? People ask me, hey, what books for someone that's getting ready to begin in the lean world? Yeah, they're The Machine That Changed the World. It's a great, right? There are some specific books to lean and continuous improvement. I throw out a lot of leadership books, right? I'm doing a series right now on LinkedIn about the 7 habits of highly effective people. Stephen Covey, oh my goodness, right? You talk about being effective as a lean consultant. Read that and start following that. That's huge.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been trying to get my head around the lean language and how we introduce it to organizations, let's say, as you said, who are at the maybe immature level. It's some organizations, as you said, you can just go in and start talking about Kaizen and Kata and process mapping and value stream mapping, and they'll know what you mean and you can get stuck in. Then others, you just can't do that. They don't understand what you mean. Like, the language can be a real barrier, I think. And we have to adapt what we're saying and bring it in very, very slowly to organizations that are not used to using it. And I don't know about you, but there's nothing better than when people start using the lean language after a period of time and you hear them speaking the language and slowly developing it, because it is a language. It really is. I don't know, has that been your experience as well?
Yeah. It has meaning to them. Like, yes. They see, they've made that connection in their head from the principles you're teaching to how it applies to their work. So
and you bring up a great point there, right? And I've done this in several organizations, and I think this goes back again to, you can't skip over the evaluate or the assess phase, right? Because I can go in and just spend a little bit of time and through these evaluations or assessments, realize very quickly, and I did this with an organization about 1.5 years ago, and I had leaders that started asking me the same question over and over. Hey, Shane, are we going to use lean? Are we going to use Six Sigma? Are we going to use agile? And my answer was the same every time. It was yes, because I knew it was a trick question, right? I had done the assessment and I knew where they were going with it. If I said lean, they were going to say, well, we're not Toyota. If I said Six Sigma, they're going to say, well, we're not GE, right? So initially, I wanted to start, and I needed to start in a very non-threatening manner. I said, hey, listen, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a little bit better every day, right? That's our goal. Now, we're going to start rolling out some methods, and we're going to start rolling out some tools that'll help us get there. And I'll be honest, at about the 3 to 4 month mark, I was a little worried. I was like, oh, they're still not using the language. And I was like, oh man, is this going to be one of those where I just completely, it's going to take like 2 years and, all of that. But all of a sudden there was a point, and I think it was about the 4.5 month mark, where I started hearing terms like kata, and I started hearing Kaizen, and I was like, yes. and it depends, right? When is that going to happen?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's going to depend on the organization.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And that's a very good point on the assessment piece as well, to bring that into your assessment at the start. What do they understand? What language can I use based on what they understand? Yeah. fully agree.
Yeah. So we need to wrap this up. It's been like the time has flown by with the information and the conversation we're having. But I'd love for you to leave us with a story of success. Anytime you're coming into an organization or just about anything that has to do with human beings, when we're trying to bring something new, some kind of change, there's fear and there's resistance to that. Do you have a favorite story that you can share about how you were able to address those fears and the resistance to build trust so that something beautiful could be implemented and grown? What do you got for a story?
Yeah, Shane, I think I was so fortunate that it was early in my career. I was at the tail end of my time in the Army, and I was still a soldier, and I was leading a project, and I won't go into all the details, but it was the way in which soldiers are evaluated when they come back and they have an injury and illness, right? So it's basically a medical board. And this was at the time that Iraq was going, Afghanistan was going. So we had tens of thousands of soldiers a year coming back, having to go through this process to be evaluated to figure out it's going to be one of three results. Either they're okay to continue in the Army and doing their job, they're okay to stay in the Army, but they have to change jobs, right? Or, hey, it's so serious that they have to be separated from the Army. And the team got together, we went through, we gathered data, we came up with a recommendation, we piloted it. The process as it was taking anywhere from a couple of months to a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, it was completely backlogged. It hadn't been changed since the 1950s. And we were actually, I'll never forget this moment. We were at the Pentagon. I was the junior person in the room. I was an enlisted soldier in a bunch of room with very senior civilian leaders. There was a 3-star general that was a senior person in the room. And we were pitching our solution to them. Now, we also had congressional staffers because we were also going to have to change federal law, which if you've ever been involved in changing law, you might know that, Shane, even at the state level, oh my goodness. Right. It is not
2 to 3
easy.
years.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we were making this recommendation. And I didn't do any of the talking. I was a junior person. One of the senior people on the team did the presentation. And at the end of this, the general looked around the room and said, okay, I get it, right? You know, it's taken a year and a half. You think you can get it down to less than a month. And actually, we had it down to 2 weeks, right? And he goes, but once again, I'm just, can someone in this room tell me why we have to go right now in front of Congress and try to get this law changed? And there were crickets. And I stood up. And it's one of those moments where I'm like, okay, this is either going to be a career ender or it'll go okay. And I basically I told a story of me meeting family members of a soldier that was an amputee, right? Had lost their leg in Iraq. And there was a spouse that was a cancer survivor that was on thousands of dollars of medications a year. The Army was paying for all of that. And this soldier had been waiting for about 16 months for a decision. So keep in mind, soldier, spouse, 3 kids, all in limbo waiting for this decision on what's going to happen with their career. And I said, sir, the reason you need to go and ask that this be changed immediately is because if you don't, you're letting that soldier and their family down. And, long story short, we ended up getting approval. It ended up getting changed into law. The process now takes weeks, not years. And that general came up to me afterwards and he said, hey, Shane, that was a great story. And he goes, that was the difference maker. You had all the data. You showed me all the tools, but your ability to humanize that and tell that in a way that it impacted soldiers and their families, that was the difference for me. And that's made the difference for me and how I've tried to work as a consultant is to humanize this. I think too many people get stuck on the process and the tools. There's human beings at the center of this. And I think that's what has to continue to be at the center of this.
Mic drop right there. let's just shh. Like, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking some time, for spending some time with us here. Thank you for all the time that you've spent, the hours, years, and whatnot, in how you have improved the world around you. Catherine, any last words that you would have to send us off with, or we good to go?
Yeah, just a big thanks to Shane. I was just saying earlier, I follow him on LinkedIn. I think you do as well. We're all connected on LinkedIn, but the first time we've actually met, and I absolutely admire your approach, the way you speak about people and put people first. And that's the way it should be. You know, Lean is built on respect for people, and that very clearly comes through when you talk. And I've just really enjoyed the opportunity to listen to you in person today. So thank you, Shane, for everything. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Is there where other than your LinkedIn, and it would just spell your name out for them, but where else could they connect with you? Maybe it's an organization that likes what you're talking about and would love to talk with you. But yeah, how can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, Shane, without the Y, Shane, Wentz. Wentz. I think I'm the only bald Shane Wentz on LinkedIn.
Handsome Shane
yeah.
Wentz.
Yeah. Yeah, on LinkedIn, once again, if you look for Shane Wentz, ACIL Consulting, we are a change in Latitude Consulting, woman-owned. My wife is 51% owner, disabled, veteran-owned small business, and we love working with companies large and small on helping them, as we say, improve their latitude, which is leveraging their people to improve the organization.
Excellent. Well, thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to talking and seeing in the ether, on the internet, and possibly sometime in the real. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. We look forward to seeing you, hearing from you, and talking to you at least by next week. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please give us a review. Thank you so much.